My son's new fiancée sat at Sunday lunch and brazenly demanded $2 million for her dream luxury wedding. She thought I'd just hand it over like a typical, comfortable dad. Then my son slipped me a note under the table. "Dad, she's a scammer. Help." I smiled calmly and said just 2 words, the ones that instantly shattered her smug mask and turned her confidence to dust. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Richard Vernon Porter. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent the last 4 years in what most people would call a comfortable retirement here in Dallas, Texas. Before that, I was an assistant U.S. attorney for 38 years, specializing in financial crimes and fraud cases. I've seen every con imaginable, or so I thought. Turns out the most dangerous ones don't come from strangers on the street. They come to Sunday dinner wearing a designer dress and a practice smile. That particular Sunday started like any other. Kevin, my son, had invited me to lunch at the French Room in the Adolphus Hotel. He'd been dating Vanessa for about 8 months, and I'll admit, I hadn't paid as much attention as I should have. Kevin is 35, successful project manager at a tech company, and he'd always been careful about relationships. Too careful, maybe. When he finally introduced me to Vanessa 3 months ago, I was just happy to see him happy. She was striking, I'll give her that. Long dark hair, perfect posture, the kind of woman who knows exactly how good she looks and exactly how to use it. Her mother, Patricia, joined us for lunch occasionally, a woman in her late 50s, with the same calculating eyes as her daughter, though she tried harder to hide it behind a veneer of Southern charm. That Sunday, both women were at the table when I arrived. Kevin looked tense. I noticed it immediately, the way he kept adjusting his napkin, the forced quality of his smile. But I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. They'd gotten engaged 2 weeks earlier. "Richard," Vanessa said, leaning forward with that brilliant smile, "I'm so glad you could make it. We have some exciting news about the wedding to share." I ordered my usual scotch and settled in, expecting to hear about a venue booking or a date. Instead, Vanessa pulled out a leather portfolio and placed it on the table between us. "Kevin and I have been planning our dream wedding," she began, her voice taking on a businesslike quality that made something in my gut tighten. "And we wanted to discuss the budget with you." Budget. Not plans, not ideas. Budget. "We've worked with a top wedding planner," she continued, opening the portfolio to reveal page after page of glossy photos and typed estimates. "And we've determined that for the wedding we envision, we'll need $2 million. The scotch arrived. I took a slow sip, watching her face. Kevin's hand was white-knuckled around his water glass. $2 million, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. "That's quite specific." "Oh, it breaks down very precisely," Vanessa said, warming to her subject. Her eyes had a gleam I'd seen before, in deposition rooms when a witness thought they had the perfect story rehearsed. $800,000 for the venue alone. We're looking at the Rosewood Mansion on Turtle Creek for 300 guests. Then $400,000 for the floral arrangements and decor. I've always dreamed of having cherry blossoms flown in from Japan, and the ice sculptures alone. $300,000 for my dress, she interrupted herself, touching her collarbone in what I'm sure she thought was a demure gesture. "Vera Wang is designing it personally. It's a once-in-a-lifetime piece." Patricia chimed in then, her voice syrupy. "Our family has certain standards, Richard. Vanessa is our only daughter. We want her day to be perfect." I glanced at Kevin. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Our eyes met for just a second, and in that moment I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a scared 10-year-old who'd broken a neighbor's window with a baseball. Pure panic. $2 million, I said again, setting down my glass. "And you're sharing this budget with me because—" Vanessa's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Well, traditionally, the groom's family contributes significantly to the wedding expenses, and Kevin mentioned that you're comfortable." Comfortable. What a delicate way to assess someone's bank account over lunch. "I see." I picked up the menu, scanning it as if this were any normal Sunday. "And have you considered what Kevin thinks about this budget?" "Kevin wants me to be happy," Vanessa said, her hand sliding over to cover his. He didn't return the gesture. "Don't you, honey?" Kevin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I... We've discussed... We've discussed that this is important to me, Vanessa cut him off smoothly, that if his family truly cares about him, they'll want to see him start his marriage properly. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Support this, or you don't support your son. I was about to respond when I felt something brush against my knee under the table. Kevin's hand passing me something. I palmed it smoothly, a skill I'd learned from watching drug dealers do the same thing in courtrooms for nearly 4 decades. Patricia was watching me carefully now. Richard, you seem hesitant. Is there a problem? Just digesting the information, I said mildly. It's a lot to take in over lunch. Vanessa leaned back, and I caught the change in her demeanor. The sweetness was evaporating. I would think that for your only son's wedding, no expense would be too great. But perhaps I'm mistaken about the kind of family Kevin comes from. There it was. The manipulation, crude but effective for most people. Attack the family bond, make it about love and loyalty instead of the absurd amount of money being demanded. Under the table, I unfolded the paper Kevin had passed me. Without looking down, I ran my thumb across it, feeling the indentations of pen strokes. Whatever he'd written, he'd pressed hard. The paper was small, maybe torn from a notepad. I kept my eyes on Vanessa as she continued talking about vintage champagne and custom invitations, all while my thumb traced the letters Kevin had carved into the note. When I'd felt enough to understand, my blood went cold. But I've learned something in 38 years of prosecuting criminals. The moment you show your hand is the moment you lose. So I smiled, nodded at appropriate moments, and listened to Vanessa's increasingly aggressive pitch, while my mind raced through everything Kevin had just told me in 6 words. Dad, she's a scammer. Please help. I looked at my son, really looked at him, the circles under his eyes that I'd dismissed as work stress, the weight he'd lost, the way he kept checking his phone with an expression close to dread whenever Vanessa wasn't watching. How had I missed this? But I knew how. I'd been alone since Kevin's mother passed 11 years ago, and I'd thrown myself into work to avoid the silence of the house. When I retired, I'd filled the void with my hobby of restoring antique legal texts and the occasional consulting work. I'd been so pleased that Kevin had finally found someone that I hadn't asked the questions a former federal prosecutor should have asked, like why a 32-year-old woman with no apparent career was living in a luxury apartment in Uptown, or why every conversation seemed to circle back to money and status, or why Kevin's friend circle had mysteriously shrunk since he'd started dating her. You're awfully quiet, Richard, Patricia observed, her tone sharp despite the smile. I shifted my attention to her. Another detail I'd overlooked, the way she choreographed these interactions, always present, always managing the conversation. This wasn't a daughter asking her mother for support. This was a team operation. Just thinking, I said pleasantly. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Thinking about what? Whether your son is worth $2 million? There was the real her flashing through the mask. The anger when someone didn't immediately capitulate. I'd seen this before. Different context, different setting, but the same pattern. The escalating demands, the emotional manipulation, the way she was already preparing the narrative that if I said no, I was the villain in Kevin's love story. Years ago, I'd prosecuted a case involving a woman who'd convinced 3 different men to invest their life savings in a luxury spa that never materialized. She'd use the same tactics, create the dream, make it seem essential, attack anyone who questioned it, isolate the victim from their support system. I'm thinking, I said slowly, about the details. What details? Vanessa's voice had an edge now. All of them. I picked up my scotch again, took another sip. $2 million is a significant sum. I assume you have detailed contracts from all these vendors? Signed agreements? Proof of the quoted prices? The silence at the table was sudden and complete. Patricia recovered first. Well, naturally, we're still in the planning stages. So you're asking for $2 million based on estimates. I kept my tone conversational. No contracts? No guarantees. Just ideas. Vanessa's cheeks flushed. It's not about the paperwork, Richard. It's about trust. It's about family. Actually, I said, When someone asks me for $2 million, it's absolutely about the paperwork. I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out which approach would work. The sweet fiancé had failed. The righteous daughter hadn't worked. Now she was moving towards something else. Maybe this was a mistake, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. Maybe Kevin and I should just elope. Save everyone the trouble. Kevin's hand jerked toward her, then stopped. I saw the conflict on his face, the desperate desire to fix this, to make everyone happy, even as he'd literally just told me she was scamming him. This was it, the moment where I could let this play out, watch my son make a catastrophic mistake, or I could do what I'd done for 38 years, cut through the lies and force the truth into the light. I smiled. It was the smile I used to give defense attorneys who thought they were clever, right before I demolished their entire case with one piece of evidence they'd overlooked. "Prove it," I said. Vanessa blinked. "What?" "Prove it. Prove that this wedding actually cost $2 million. Show me the detailed estimates from real vendors with real company names and tax IDs. Show me signed proposals. Show me anything that demonstrates this isn't just a number you pulled out of thin air." Her mouth opened, closed. Patricia's eyes had gone hard. "You have 72 hours, I continued, pulling out my phone and making a show of setting a reminder. 3 days to provide documentation for every single dollar you're requesting. If this wedding truly costs $2 million, proving it should be simple." "This is insulting," Patricia hissed. "This is due diligence," I corrected. "Something I should have done months ago." I stood up, dropped $200 bills on the table for lunch, and looked at Kevin. "Son, I need to speak with you. Privately." Vanessa grabbed his arm. "Kevin, you don't have to—" "Yes," I said quietly. "He does. Because this is my son, and I will not watch him be manipulated. Not anymore." The look Vanessa gave me then was pure hatred, and in that moment I knew Kevin's note was absolutely right. This woman was a scammer, and she'd just realized that her Mark's father wasn't going to be as easy to handle as his lovesick son. I walked out of that restaurant with Kevin behind me, and for the first time in 4 years of retirement, I felt the old fire burning again, the thrill of the hunt, the pursuit of justice. Someone had tried to con my son. They'd picked the wrong family. Kevin sat in my study for 2 hours that evening, and I watched my son unravel the story of the past 8 months, like he was pulling apart a badly stitched seam. "It started so perfectly," he said, staring at his hands. "We met at a charity gala. She seemed different, intelligent, cultured, interested in meaningful things. She asked about my work, actually listened when I talked about project management strategies. I poured him a whiskey. He needed it. When did the money talk start? I asked. Second date. He laughed bitterly. She asked what neighborhood I lived in, where I grew up, what you did for a living. I thought she was just getting to know me, making conversation. But I knew better. Those weren't conversation starters. Those were asset assessments disguised as small talk. By the third week, she'd mentioned 3 times that her previous boyfriend had been financially irresponsible. Kevin took a long drink. She made it sound like a warning sign she'd learned to watch for. I actually felt proud that I had my finances in order. Classic. Make the mark think meeting your standards is an achievement. The friends thing was gradual, he continued. Matt called too much. Jessica was clearly jealous of our relationship. Derek worked too many hours and was a bad influence on my work-life balance. Before I knew it, the only people I was seeing regularly were Vanessa and Patricia. Isolation, I murmured. What? It's a standard technique. Cut the victim off from outside perspectives. Make sure no one can raise red flags. I'd seen it in domestic abuse cases, financial exploitation schemes, cult recruitment. The pattern was always the same. Kevin's face crumpled. I'm such an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're a good man who wanted to believe someone loved you. I sat forward. But that ends now. Tell me about the investments in your future. Over the next hour, Kevin painted a picture that made my blood pressure climb with each detail. The emergency car repair that Vanessa needed help with, $12,000 for a BMW she'd crashed while texting. The family medical bills that Patricia couldn't quite cover, $8,000 for procedures that, I was now certain, never happened. The investment opportunity in a friend's boutique, $15,000 into a business that Kevin had never seen, proof actually existed. $35,000 in 8 months. And Kevin, desperate to prove himself a worthy partner, had paid every time. The wedding demand was different, though, Kevin said, more aggressive. When I suggested we could have something smaller, she actually threw a glass at the wall, then immediately apologized, cried, said she was just stressed about her mother's expectations. Escalation, I said. They were testing how much they could push you. They? Kevin looked up. Patricia's involved. Has to be. This operation is too smooth for one person. I stood, pacing my study. Think about it. Every time you hesitated, Patricia was there to reinforce Vanessa's position. Every guilt trip had backup. Every demand came with a secondary voice validating it. Kevin's eyes widened as he processed this. The lunch today, Patricia brought up family standards before Vanessa even finished talking about the budget. Exactly. They're working together. I stopped at my bookshelf, fingers trailing over the spines of legal texts I'd collected over decades. Kevin, I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Vanessa ever asked you to transfer money to specific accounts? Accounts that weren't clearly hers? His face went pale. The boutique investment. She said her friend's business partner handled the financial side. Gave me routing and account numbers. How did you know? Because I'd prosecuted this exact scheme in 2015. Different players, same playbook. The 72 hours I gave her, I said, that wasn't arbitrary. It's enough time for them to either produce legitimate documentation, which they can't, or enough time for them to make a mistake trying to fake it. What kind of mistake? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. The kind that proves fraud. Kevin left around midnight. I told him to go home, get some sleep, and wait for my call. What I didn't tell him was that I wouldn't be sleeping. I spent that night in my study, pulling up databases I still had access to through consulting relationships, making lists, building timelines. If Vanessa and Patricia were running the con, I suspected, they'd done it before. Scammers like this don't start with $2 million demands. They work up to it, refining their approach with each victim. By 3 a.m, I had 4 possibles. Engagements in Texas over the past 5 years that had ended abruptly, where the groom-to-be had money, where wedding deposits had been paid and lost. By dawn, I had a plan. I called a number I hadn't used in 3 years, Gerald Lawrence, a private investigator who'd worked several of my cases when I needed information the legal system couldn't officially obtain. Richard Porter, Gerald said when he answered, sounding wide awake despite the early hour. Haven't heard from you since you retired. Missed the action? Something like that. I need background on 2 women. Deep background. Financial records. Previous relationships. Property holdings. The works. This official? Personal. My son's fiancée and her mother. I think they're running a wedding scam. Gerald whistled low. How personal are we talking? $8,500 personal. I'll have preliminary results in 5 days. Full report in 2 weeks. 5 days for a preliminaries works. I'll send you the details within the hour. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and watched the sunrise paint my study orange and gold. Somewhere across Dallas, Vanessa and Patricia were probably congratulating themselves on their performance at lunch, confident they'd either get their money or move on to the next target. They had no idea that the confused, hesitant father they'd seen at the French room was gone. In his place was the prosecutor who'd sent 43 financial criminals to federal prison, and this time it was personal. The next morning, Kevin received a text from Vanessa, still waiting on that apology from your father. This is our future he's disrespecting. I told Kevin not to respond yet. The morning after that, Patricia called Kevin directly, a move that confirmed my suspicion about her active role. Your father's behavior was unacceptable, she said, her voice dripping with wounded dignity. Vanessa is heartbroken. If your family can't respect her, perhaps we need to reconsider this entire engagement. The threat was clear. Give us what we want, or we'll make you the villain who lost the perfect woman. Kevin, to his credit, was learning. I'll talk to him, he said neutrally. We're having dinner tomorrow night. Which was true. What Patricia didn't know was that dinner would include strategic planning, not apologies. The 72 hours passed with no documentation from Vanessa. Not a single vendor contract, not one signed proposal. Instead, on hour 71, she sent Kevin a text. Spoke with the wedding planner. She said verbal agreements are standard in luxury events. The detailed contracts come after the deposit. You do trust me, don't you? Beautiful. She was creating a narrative where asking for proof became an act of distrust, where due diligence became betrayal. I screenshotted that text. It would be useful later. On the 5th day after lunch, Gerald called. Your instincts were right, he said without preamble. Vanessa Morales, born Vanessa Christine Gutierrez, 32 years old, 3 previous engagements in the past 7 years, all in Texas. All ended 2 to 3 weeks before the wedding date. My hand tightened on the phone. Tell me about them. First one, Houston, the groom's name was Marcus Webb, tech entrepreneur, lost $340,000 in wedding deposits. Claimed Vanessa kept delaying the contract reviews, saying her planner worked on trust and relationships. By the time he insisted on documentation, she'd already transferred the money. Wedding got called off when he finally demanded to meet the vendors. Vanessa said he was controlling and left. I was writing this down, my handwriting sharp and precise. Second engagement, Austin, Daniel Crawford, real estate developer, $275,000. Same pattern, luxury wedding plans, vague documentation, money transferred to various vendors. Engagement ended when he started asking questions. Let me guess, I said. Vanessa said he didn't trust her. Almost word for word. The third one's interesting, though. Stephen Richards, San Antonio, investment banker, $410,000. He actually hired a lawyer to investigate before the engagement ended. Found out 11 of the 20 vendors on Vanessa's list were shell companies, bank accounts registered to various names, all connected back to Patricia Morales through shared addresses and phone numbers. Did he prosecute? Wanted to, but his lawyer advised against it, said the case was complex, would take years, and Vanessa could claim the relationships with vendors went bad after she'd paid deposits in good faith. Richards decided to cut his losses and move on. He got married to someone else 6 months later, didn't want the drama haunting his new relationship. Smart from a personal standpoint, frustrating from a justice standpoint. So they've pulled this at least 3 times, I said. Probably more that we don't know about. Definitely more. I'm finding traces of similar patterns going back further, but the records get murky. Patricia Morales has been working various financial schemes since the early 2000s. Credit card fraud, identity theft, insurance scams. Nothing that stuck legally, but the pattern's there. They're professionals. They're professionals who got sloppy, Gerald corrected. They're working the same state, similar demographics, same basic con. If someone connects the dots, someone like, say, a former federal prosecutor, the whole thing falls apart. I smiled. How much of this can you document? All of it. Bank records, phone logs, property records, the works. I've also got contact information for all 3 previous victims. Whether they'll talk to you is another question. Forward me everything. I'll handle the victims. That afternoon, while Vanessa sent Kevin increasingly desperate texts about needing a decision on the venue deposit, I sat in my study and read through Gerald's full preliminary report. It was damning. Not just 3 victims. The deep dive had uncovered evidence of at least 5, going back 7 years. The total take was over $1,300,000. These women had refined wedding fraud into an art form. The next morning, I received an email from Vanessa to Kevin, copied to me. The subject line read, Final wedding budget, ready for your review. I opened it. 23 pages of detailed breakdowns, vendor names, service descriptions, and costs totaling $2,100,000. It looked professional, thorough, legitimate. It was also almost certainly complete fiction. I forwarded it to Gerald. How long to verify these vendors? His response came back in under an hour. 11 of these companies don't exist. The others are real businesses, but when I called, pretending to be a groom checking references, none of them have contracts or even conversations with anyone named Vanessa Morales. Perfect. I called Edward Grant, an attorney who specialized in family law and financial disputes. I'd testified in 3 of his cases over the years, but we weren't friends, just professionals with mutual respect. Edward, I need to hire you. My son's being targeted by a wedding scam, and I need someone who can build an airtight case. How airtight are we talking? Airtight enough that if this goes to court, the other side doesn't just lose. They face criminal charges. When can you meet? Tomorrow morning. Bring your retainer agreement. Edward's fee was $6,800. I wrote the check without hesitation. That evening, Kevin came to dinner, as planned. He looked exhausted, his phone buzzing constantly with texts from Vanessa that were cycling between sweet, "I love you so much, can't wait to be your wife," and aggressive, "Your father is trying to destroy our happiness." "She sent the budget," he said. "Did you see it?" "I saw it. It's fake." Kevin's shoulders slumped. "I keep hoping you're wrong, that maybe this is all a misunderstanding and she really does love me." "I know," I said gently, "but hope doesn't change facts, and the facts say she's done this to at least 3 other men. You're not the first, Kevin. You're just the next mark in a pattern." I showed him Gerald's report, watched his face as he read through the documented history of Vanessa's previous engagements, the money lost, the abandoned grooms who'd been exactly where he was now. When he finished, his hands were shaking. "What do we do?" he asked quietly. I leaned forward, my voice steady and cold. "We accept her invitation to meet with the wedding coordinator. We go to that meeting, and we let them show us exactly who they are." Then what? Then I thought, we show them what happens when you try to con a prosecutor's son. But what I said was simpler. Then we make sure this never happens to anyone else. Gerald's full report arrived 2 days later, a comprehensive document that read like a criminal indictment. I spent an entire evening in my study, cross-referencing bank records, phone logs, and property transfers. The pattern was unmistakable and damning. The next morning, I hired Thomas Chen, a financial analyst who specialized in fraud detection. His fee was $4,200, but what he could do with raw data was worth every penny. I needed someone who could take Gerald's findings and transform them into courtroom-ready evidence. "I need a forensic breakdown of these transactions," I told him, sliding the report across his desk. "Show me the money trail, every fake vendor, every shell company, every fraudulent transfer. Make it so clear that a jury could understand it in 5 minutes." Thomas scanned the first few pages, his eyebrows rising. "Wedding fraud? That's a new one for me." "It's old as time," I corrected, "just with a modern twist. How long?" "Give me a week. You'll have a presentation that would make the IRS weep with joy." While Thomas worked his magic with spreadsheets, I focused on the legal framework. Edward Grant's office became my second home. We spent hours mapping out the strategy, anticipating every possible move Vanessa and Patricia might make. "The challenge," Edward explained, "is that wedding planning exists in a legal gray area. Unless we can prove intent to defraud from the beginning, they can claim the relationships with vendors simply fell through." "That's where the pattern evidence comes in," I said. "1 failed engagement could be bad luck. 3 is a pattern. 5 is a criminal enterprise. Can you get the previous victims to testify? I'm working on it." That evening, I made the first call. Marcus Webb, the Houston tech entrepreneur, answered on the 3rd ring. "Mr. Webb, my name is Richard Porter. I'm a retired federal prosecutor, and I'm calling because I believe you were targeted by the same people who are currently trying to scam my son." Silence on the other end. Then, "Vanessa Morales? You remember her. I lost $340,000 to that woman and her mother. Of course I remember her." His voice was tight with old anger. "What do you want?" "I want to stop them from doing this to anyone else. I have evidence of multiple victims. If we build a strong enough case, we can get law enforcement involved. But I need you to be willing to share your story, possibly testify." Another pause. "What makes you think this will work?" I talked to lawyers. They said it would be my word against hers, that proving fraud would be nearly impossible. "Because I have something you didn't have, a pattern. 4 other victims besides you and my son. Bank records showing the same shell companies, the same tactics, the same timeline. Individually, you couldn't prove it. Together, we can prove it beyond any reasonable doubt." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Send me what you have. Let me review it. If it's solid, I'll help. 2 down, Daniel Crawford in Austin took more convincing but eventually agreed. Stephen Richards in San Antonio practically volunteered when I mentioned Patricia's name. That woman, he said, disgust evident in his voice, sat at my dinner table and talked about family values while planning to rob me blind. If you can put them away, I'll testify in my sleep. The previous Dallas and Fort Worth victims took longer to track down, but Gerald's contacts paid off. 5 victims total, all with similar stories, all ready to speak. Meanwhile, Vanessa's pressure on Kevin intensified. The text came every few hours now. We need to secure the venue by the end of the week. My planner says we're going to lose the date if we don't put down the deposit. I can't believe your father is making this so difficult. Doesn't he want you to be happy? And then the one that made me smile. Fine. Let's meet with the wedding coordinator together. Bring your father if he needs proof. Elite Wedding Designs, Thursday at 2 p.m. Address to follow. Kevin forwarded me the text. I called Edward immediately. She took the bait, I said. Meeting scheduled for Thursday. You sure you want to do this? We could just file a police report with what we have. I want them to know. I want them to see it coming and realize there's nothing they can do to stop it. I paused. Call it professional satisfaction. Edward chuckled. You missed the courtroom. More than I care to admit. The address came through the next day. A building in the design district. Street-level office suite. I had Gerald run it. The space had been vacant for 3 months. Listed for lease at $2,800 a month. No business named Elite Wedding Designs had ever been registered at that address. Perfect. On Thursday morning, I dressed in my old courtroom suit, charcoal gray pressed until the creases could cut glass. Kevin met me at my house looking nervous. You ready for this? I asked. I don't know. Part of me still hopes this is all a mistake. It's not. But after today, you'll have certainty. Sometimes that's better than hope. Edward arrived at 1:30. We drove to the design district together, arriving 15 minutes early. The building was exactly as described. Modern, sleek, mostly empty. Suite 140 had a temporary Elite Wedding Designs placard taped to the door. Someone had put effort into the staging. Classy, Edward muttered, photographing the obviously fake sign. We waited in the parking lot. At exactly 2 o'clock, Vanessa's Mercedes pulled up. She emerged first, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Patricia followed, her expression already defensive. They didn't see us immediately. I watched Vanessa check her phone, touch up her lipstick, arrange her face into what she probably thought was a warm smile. The transformation was remarkable, from calculating to charming in under 30 seconds. Then she spotted us getting out of Edward's car, and her smile faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself. Kevin, darling, she called, walking toward us with arms outstretched. I'm so glad you're here. And you brought your father. How thorough. I said nothing, just watched. Patricia's eyes narrowed when she saw Edward. Who's this? Edward Grant, he said pleasantly. I'm Mr. Porter's attorney. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Attorney? Vanessa's voice climbed half an octave. Why on earth would we need an attorney at a wedding planning meeting? Shall we go inside? I suggested. I'm curious to meet your coordinator. The suite was empty. Completely, utterly empty. No furniture, no decoration, nothing but beige carpet and white walls. A card table had been set up in the center with 4 folding chairs around it, the kind you can buy at any hardware store for $15 each. Vanessa's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, then calculation, then a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, she said, her voice bright and brittle. Michelle must be running late. She texted me this morning that she was moving some furniture to her new office space. This is just temporary while she relocates. Michelle? I repeated. That would be Michelle Lawson, your wedding coordinator? Yes, exactly. She's very in demand. Books out months in advance. Interesting. I opened my briefcase. I'd brought my old leather one, the one I used to carry into federal court, and pulled out a folder. Because according to the Texas Secretary of State Business Registry, no business named Elite Wedding Designs exists, and no wedding planner named Michelle Lawson is licensed in Dallas County. Vanessa's smile froze. Patricia took a half step backward. There must be a mistake in the records, Vanessa stammered. Michelle works independently. She might not be officially registered. Let's table that for a moment, I interrupted, placing the folder on the card table. I want to talk about your budget. The $2.1 million estimate you sent Kevin. I opened the folder. 23 pages of vendor analysis, each one marked up in red. Thomas had done exceptional work. Every fake company highlighted, every inconsistency noted, every red flag circled. 23 vendors, I said, my voice conversational. 11 of them don't exist. The bank accounts you provided route to shell companies registered to various names, all of which, interestingly, share mailing addresses with your mother. Patricia's face had gone the color of old paper. This is ridiculous. We don't have to listen to these accusations. The other 12 vendors are real, I continued, ignoring her. I called each one personally. Not a single one has a contract with anyone named Vanessa Morales. Several had never even heard of you. Vanessa's hands were trembling. She clasped them together, trying to hide it, but I saw. I'd seen that gesture 1,000 times in interrogation rooms. The moment when a suspect realizes the evidence is airtight. You're invading my privacy, she managed. This is harassment. This is due diligence. I pulled out another document. Gerald's report, condensed to the essential facts. Let's talk about Marcus Webb, Houston tech entrepreneur. Lost $340,000 to a wedding that never happened. Ring any bells? Vanessa's pupils dilated. She shot a look at Patricia, who looked like she wanted to bolt for the door. Or Daniel Crawford, I continued. Austin, real estate developer, $275,000. Or Stephen Richards, now he's interesting. San Antonio, investment banker, $410,000. He actually hired a lawyer, started uncovering the shell companies. You two left town pretty quickly after that. I don't know what you're talking about, Vanessa said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. Those are just coincidences. 3 previous engagements that ended weeks before the wedding, all with substantial deposits paid and never returned, all with the same pattern of fake vendors and shell companies. I leaned forward. Vanessa, I spent 38 years prosecuting financial crimes. This isn't a coincidence. This is a criminal enterprise. Kevin was staring at Vanessa like he'd never seen her before, which in a way he hadn't. The mask was cracking, and what lay beneath was desperate and cornered. Patricia found her voice. You can't prove any of this. You're harassing my daughter because you don't think she's good enough for your precious son. I can prove all of it, I said quietly. Bank records, phone logs, testimony from 5 victims, including the 2 you scammed right here in Dallas and Fort Worth in the years before you branched out to other cities. I paused, watching her face drain of color. Did you think I wouldn't find them? Did you think I wouldn't connect the dots? The room was silent except for the hum of the building's HVAC system. Vanessa looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the door. Kevin looked at me, his expression a mixture of horror and relief. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to leave. You're going to break off this engagement. You're going to disappear from Kevin's life completely. And in exchange, I won't walk into the Dallas County District Attorney's office with this file. You're bluffing, Patricia said, but her voice shook. Am I? I pulled out my phone, pulled up a contact. This is the direct line for the Assistant District Attorney, in charge of financial crimes. I worked with him for 15 years. 1 call and you're both under investigation by morning. Vanessa's composure finally shattered. You bastard, she hissed. You self-righteous bastard. Your son was nothing special, you know that? Just another mark with a trust fund and daddy issues. There it is, I said softly. The truth. Thank you for that. Edward had been silent until now, but he spoke up. My clients have no further business with either of you. Any attempt to contact Kevin will be considered harassment and will result in immediate legal action. We have documentation of everything that's happened here today. He'd been recording on his phone the whole time. Vanessa noticed, and her eyes widened. You can leave now, I said, or I can make that call. Your choice. Patricia grabbed Vanessa's arm. We're going. This is insane. You'll regret this, Richard. No, I said, standing. I really won't. They left. Vanessa's high heels clicked frantically on the tile as they fled. Through the window, I watched them practically run to the Mercedes, Patricia's hand shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice before getting the door open. Kevin let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for months. "Is it really over?" he asked. I looked at Edward. He was checking his recording, a satisfied smile on his face. "Not quite," I said, "but it's about to be." I was wrong about them giving up. 2 days after our confrontation at the empty office, Kevin received a certified letter. Vanessa was suing him for breach of promise to marry, demanding $1.5 million in damages for emotional distress and lost opportunities. "Can she actually do this?" Kevin asked, his voice tight with disbelief. We were sitting in my study. The lawsuit spread across my desk like a declaration of war. "Technically, yes," Edward said. He'd come over immediately when I called. "Texas is one of the few states where breach of promise suits are still legally viable. They're almost never successful, but they're possible." "It's a desperate move," I said, scanning the complaint. Vanessa's attorney, some bottom feeder named Roland Hutchins who advertised on bus benches, had cobbled together a case built entirely on emotional manipulation. Kevin had allegedly made promises, raised expectations, introduced her to family and friends as his fiancée, then cruelly discarded her when his father interfered. It was fiction, but fiction presented with just enough truth to be dangerous. "She's claiming I damaged her reputation," Kevin said, reading over my shoulder. "That calling off the engagement has caused her psychological trauma, requiring therapy. That she turned down other opportunities because she believed we were getting married." "Other opportunities," I repeated. "You mean other marks." Edward was making notes. "They're trying to paint you as the villain, Richard. The controlling father who destroyed his son's happiness. It's actually a clever angle. Plays on sympathy. Makes this about family interference rather than fraud. Except we have evidence of the fraud, which they'll claim is irrelevant to the question of whether Kevin broke a promise to marry. They're separating the issues. This suit is only about the broken engagement, not about the wedding planning." I sat back, studying the lawsuit. It was a gamble on Vanessa's part, and a risky one. But I understood the strategy. If she could win even a partial judgment, she'd salvage something from this disaster. And more importantly, she'd create a legal record that muddied the waters, made it harder to prosecute her for fraud when there was a court judgment saying she was the wrong party. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "Kevin, 3 weeks ago you started recording your conversations with Vanessa, remember?" Kevin nodded. "You told me to ask her permission at the beginning of one of our talks. Something about transparency in relationships." "And did she agree?" "Yeah, she said it was a great idea. Said couples should be completely open with each other." He paused. "Wait, you knew she'd—" "I knew she'd agree because it sounded like something a loving, trusting partner would say, and I knew that once she agreed, Texas law would allow you to record all your subsequent conversations with her." I looked at Edward. "One-party consent state." Edward's eyes widened. "You've been planning this since before the confrontation." "Since the day I gave them 72 hours to prove their budget?" I turned to Kevin. "Do you still have all those recordings?" "On my phone, backed up to the cloud." "How many?" "Maybe 15 or 20 conversations. She called me constantly after that lunch." "Play me the one where she's talking to Patricia. The one from last week." Kevin pulled up his phone, found the file, hit play. Vanessa's voice filled my study, clear and unmistakable. "He's going to cave, Mom. The old man thinks he's smart, but Kevin's weak. Once I cry a little, tell him I can't live without him, he'll override his father." Patricia's voice. "What if he doesn't?" "Then we cut our losses and move to the next city. Austin's played out anyway. Maybe Colorado, somewhere fresh." "What about the money we already got from him?" "The 35,000. Ancient history. He'd have to prove it was fraud, not gifts. We're clear on that." "And the wedding deposits if we'd gotten them?" Vanessa laughed. "Same as always. The vendors will say they had contracts. They'll show our forged signatures. The deposits are non-refundable. By the time anyone figures out the companies don't exist, we're already gone." I stopped the recording. Kevin's face had gone pale. He'd never actually listened to this one before. "That's from last week?" Edward asked. 5 days ago, Kevin confirmed. "That's conspiracy to commit fraud," Edward said softly. "That's admission of previous frauds. That's—" he shook his head. "That's everything." "That's what we file with our response to the lawsuit," I said. along with the financial analysis showing the fake vendors, along with affidavits from the previous victims, along with a motion to dismiss her suit and a counterclaim for attempted fraud. Edward was already opening his laptop. I'll have the response filed by tomorrow morning. This lawsuit was the worst mistake they could have made. But I was thinking ahead, seeing the next moves. They don't know about the recordings, or the other victims. They think this is a he said, she said situation where their sob story might work. When do they find out? Kevin asked. At the hearing. I want to see their faces when the judge hears that recording. Edward looked up from his laptop. Richard, we should tell you. There's something else. I got a call this afternoon from the Texas Attorney General's office. Someone there has been looking into wedding fraud schemes, apparently triggered by complaints from the Stephen Richards case. When I mentioned Vanessa Morales, they asked me to send over everything we have. The Consumer Protection Division? Financial crimes? They're building a case. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then we need to make sure they have everything they need. That night, I compiled a comprehensive package. Gerald's investigative report, Thomas's financial analysis, the recordings, witness statements from all 5 previous victims, bank records showing the shell companies, everything cross-referenced, indexed, and presented in the format I'd used for federal prosecutions. The package went to 3 places. Edward, for the civil lawsuit response, the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division, and the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, marked for the attention of the Fraud Prosecution Unit. The next morning, Edward filed our response. It was a 53-page document that systematically destroyed every claim in Vanessa's lawsuit and presented evidence of a multi-year criminal conspiracy. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Kevin was nervous. I was not. What if the judge doesn't allow the evidence? He asked. What if they claim it's not relevant? It's completely relevant. She's claiming emotional distress from a broken engagement. We're showing that the engagement was fraudulent from the start, that she never intended to marry you, that this was always about money. That directly contradicts her claim. And if the judge doesn't see it that way, then we appeal. But trust me, judges don't like being lied to, and this lawsuit is built on lies. The wheels started turning faster than I expected. 1 week before the scheduled hearing, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. James Patterson, a senior investigator with the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. We'd worked together on a mortgage fraud case back when I was still prosecuting. Richard Porter, he said when I answered. I heard you were retired and restoring old books. I am, mostly. Except when you're building criminal cases that would make a federal prosecutor jealous. I got your package. It's immaculate. Thank you. We want to move on this. Immediately. The evidence of organized fraud is overwhelming, and with 5 victims willing to testify, we can make charges stick. But I need to coordinate with your civil case. What do you need? The recordings. Official copies, properly authenticated. And I need statements from Kevin about the timeline of his relationship with Vanessa Morales and the money he transferred to her or to alleged vendors. You'll have everything by tomorrow. One more thing. We found 2 more victims. Well, potential victims. Women who were engaged to the same man, different men, and the engagements ended right after the women started asking questions about wedding budgets. Both in New Mexico, just over the state line. Patricia Morales was involved in both. 7 victims. The pattern was even worse than I'd thought. Are they willing to testify? Working on it. But here's the thing, Richard. We're going to need to file charges before your civil hearing. The DA wants this shut down now before they can target anyone else. How soon? Next week, maybe sooner. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Do it. 2 days later, Vanessa made her next mistake. She sent Kevin a series of text messages that started conciliatory and ended threatening. Kevin, I still love you. We can work this out. Your father doesn't have to control your life. I'm willing to drop the lawsuit if you just talk to me. And then when Kevin didn't respond, you know I have connections, people who can make life difficult for you and your father. Think carefully about how far you want to push this. Some fights aren't worth winning. Kevin showed me the messages immediately. I forwarded them to both Edward and James Patterson. Is she actually threatening us? Kevin asked. She's desperate. and desperate people make stupid choices. I looked at the last message again. That's witness intimidation, or attempted intimidation anyway. Edward called within the hour. I'm filing an emergency motion for a protective order. Those messages are clearly intended to coerce Kevin into dropping the countersuit. And I'm sending them to Patterson, I said. They show consciousness of guilt. But Vanessa wasn't done. The day before the hearing, she posted on social media a long emotional message about how her fiancé's father had destroyed her relationship, how she was fighting for her right to love, how she'd been traumatized by a man who couldn't accept that his son had his own life. It was manipulative, calculated to generate sympathy. And it might have worked, except that 3 of her previous victims saw it. Marcus Webb commented, "Interesting story. Is it the same one you told me before you disappeared, with $340,000? Daniel Crawford shared it with his own comment. "This woman is a con artist. I lost $275,000 to her exact same scheme." Stephen Richards simply posted, "Fraud, pure and simple." Vanessa's post disappeared within an hour, but the screenshots lived forever. By that evening, they were all over local Dallas social media groups, shared by people warning others about wedding scams. The next morning, the day of the hearing, I received a call from Vanessa's attorney, Roland Hutchins. "Mr. Porter, I'd like to discuss settlement." "I'm listening." "My client is willing to withdraw the lawsuit in exchange for your agreement not to pursue criminal charges or counterclaims." "Your client doesn't have that power. The criminal investigation is out of her hands and mine. The Attorney General's office is handling it." Silence. Then, "She wasn't aware of that." "She is now. As for the counterclaim, we'll withdraw it when she and her mother leave the state and never contact my son again, and when they repay every dollar they've stolen from their previous victims." "That's not realistic?" "Then we'll see you in court." He hung up. 3 hours later, we stood before Judge Margaret Sanchez in Dallas County Civil Court. The courtroom was nearly empty. Civil hearings rarely drew crowds, but I noticed Gerald sitting in the back and Thomas Chen. They'd both asked to watch. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table with Roland Hutchins, dressed in a conservative suit that probably cost $3,000. She looked demure, wounded, the picture of a heartbroken woman seeking justice. Patricia wasn't there. Interesting. The hearing began with Hutchins presenting Vanessa's case. He played it for maximum emotion, the whirlwind romance, the proposal, the excitement of planning a future together, the crushing blow when Kevin's father interfered. Miss Morales trusted that she had found her life partner. Hutchins said she introduced Mr. Kevin Porter to her family, her friends. She turned down other opportunities, other relationships, because she believed in this commitment. And then, without warning, it was ripped away from her. Judge Sanchez listened impassively, making notes. Then it was Edward's turn. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording. It was made with the knowledge and consent of both parties, in compliance with Texas recording consent laws." He played the conversation between Vanessa and Patricia, the one about Kevin being weak, about cutting losses and moving to the next city, about the previous frauds. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Vanessa's face transformed. Shock, then panic, then a desperate attempt at composure. Hutchins was frantically writing notes, probably trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster. "Your Honor," Edward continued, "we have evidence that Miss Morales has been engaged 4 previous times in the past 7 years. Each engagement ended shortly before the wedding. Each time, substantial deposits were paid to vendors who later proved to be fictitious or unconnected to the defendant. We have 5 victims prepared to testify, with combined losses exceeding $1.3 million. He laid out the evidence methodically: the fake wedding budget, the shell companies, the pattern of behavior, the previous victims' affidavits. Judge Sanchez's expression hardened with each document. When Edward finished, she looked at Hutchins. "Does your client wish to respond?" Hutchins stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to request a continuance to review this new evidence." "It's not new, Counselor. It's a matter of public record. Your client's previous engagements, the business registrations or lack thereof, all of this was discoverable with basic due diligence." We maintain that Miss Morales' previous relationships have no bearing on whether Mr. Porter broke his promise to... I've heard enough. Judge Sanchez's voice was ice. The plaintiff's suit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm granting the defendant's counterclaim and awarding costs and attorney's fees in the amount of... She paused, checking Edward's filing. $18,400. Vanessa made a sound like she'd been punched. Miss Morales, the judge continued, I'm also referring this matter to the Dallas County District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible fraud. You're dismissed. We stood. Vanessa remained seated, staring at the table. Hutchins was already gathering his papers, clearly eager to distance himself from his client. As we left the courtroom, I heard Vanessa finally speak, her voice small and broken. What do I do now? I didn't look back. Outside, Edward was grinning. That went better than expected. It went exactly as expected, I corrected. She handed us everything we needed. Kevin looked dazed. It's really over? The civil case is over, I said. The criminal case is just beginning. My phone buzzed. A text from James Patterson. Charges filed. Arrest warrants issued for Vanessa Morales and Patricia Morales. Wire fraud and organized criminal activity. Thanks for the gift-wrapped case. I showed the message to Kevin and Edward. They're being arrested? Kevin asked. Probably within the hour, I said. Patterson doesn't waste time. And sure enough, as we walked to the parking lot, 2 Dallas police patrol cars pulled up to the courthouse entrance. Through the glass doors, I watched officers approach Vanessa, who was still sitting in the courtroom, alone and defeated. The transformation was complete, from predator to prey in less than a month. Justice, I'd learned in 38 years of prosecution, doesn't always arrive quickly, but when it does, it's beautiful to watch. The courtroom hearing I described was just the preliminary dismissal. The real show came a week later. The Attorney General's office moved faster than even I'd anticipated. Within days of filing charges, they'd secured grand jury indictments against both Vanessa and Patricia Morales. Wire fraud, using electronic communications to defraud victims across state lines. Organized criminal activity, operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The charges carried a combined maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison. The arraignment was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I wasn't required to attend, but there was no way I was missing it. Kevin came with me. We sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse, watching as Vanessa and Patricia were led in by U.S. Marshals. They'd been denied bail reduction. Judge Chen had agreed with the prosecution that they were flight risks, given their history of moving cities after each fraud. Both women looked terrible. Vanessa's designer clothes were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Her hair, always perfectly styled, hung limp. Patricia looked older somehow, the veneer of respectability stripped away to reveal what she really was, a common criminal. The arraignment itself was brief. Both women pleaded not guilty, as expected. Their public defender, they couldn't afford private counsel anymore, requested a trial date. The prosecutor, a sharp young attorney named Sarah Mitchell, presented the evidence summary. 7 victims, total documented losses of $1,420,000, pattern of behavior spanning 8 years. Your Honor, Mitchell said, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. We have victim testimony, financial records, recorded conversations admitting to the fraud scheme, and documentation of the shell companies used to launder the money. The defendants operated this scheme across multiple Texas cities, targeting vulnerable men with calculated precision. The judge set the trial for 8 weeks out. As we left the courthouse, Kevin was quiet. We walked to my car in silence. You okay? I asked. I keep thinking about what she said, that I was just another mark with a trust fund and daddy issues. He shook his head. Was I really that obvious? You were lonely. There's nothing wrong with wanting companionship. I started the car. She's a professional. She's been doing this for years. You're not the first person she fooled, and you wouldn't have been the last if we hadn't stopped her. Because of you. If you hadn't seen through it. You saw through it, I corrected. That note you passed me at lunch. She's a scammer. Help. You knew something was wrong. You just needed backup to act on it. He was silent for a moment. What happens now? Now we wait for the trial. But honestly, I don't think it'll go to trial. The evidence is too strong. Mitchell will offer a plea deal and their lawyer will tell them to take it. I was right. 3 weeks later, Edward called with news. Vanessa Morales is pleading guilty to all charges. Patricia, too. They're allocuting in federal court tomorrow. What's the sentence? Vanessa gets 12 years, Patricia gets 15. The difference is because Patricia has prior fraud convictions from 20 years ago. She did 3 years in California for credit card fraud. 12 years. Vanessa would be 44 when she got out. Patricia would be 74. The allocution hearing was even more satisfying than the arraignment. Allocution is where defendants admit their crimes in open court, describing what they did and acknowledging their guilt. Vanessa went first. Standing before Judge Chen, she read from a prepared statement. I engaged in a scheme to defraud multiple victims by pretending to plan weddings that I never intended to go through with. I created fake vendor companies, accepted deposits for services that would never be provided, and ended the engagements before the weddings, keeping the money. I did this with Marcus Webb, Daniel Crawford, Stephen Richards, and 4 others. I worked with my mother to coordinate these frauds. I am guilty of these crimes. Her voice was flat, defeated. No tears, no emotion, just the cold recitation of facts. Patricia's statement was similar, though she tried to inject some maternal excuse. I participated in these frauds to help my daughter, but I understand now that what we did was wrong and caused real harm to real people. Judge Chen wasn't having it. Ms. Morales, you didn't participate to help your daughter. You orchestrated a criminal enterprise that spanned nearly a decade. You taught your daughter how to manipulate people, how to create false documents, how to target vulnerable victims. This wasn't motherly concern. This was greed. Patricia's face crumbled, but she said nothing. The judge continued, Additionally, as part of the plea agreement, both defendants will be required to pay restitution to all 7 victims. The total restitution amount is $1,420,000, plus interest, to be paid jointly and severally. Joint and several liability meant each victim could collect from either defendant, and the 2 women would have to figure out between themselves how to split the debt. In practical terms, it meant they'd both be in debt for the rest of their lives. As the marshals led them away, Vanessa looked back at the gallery. Her eyes found Kevin, then me. I saw rage there and humiliation, and something that might have been regret. But mostly I saw the recognition that she'd been beaten at her own game by someone who knew the rules better than she did. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just held her gaze until she looked away. Outside the courthouse, Marcus Webb was waiting. He'd flown in from Houston for the hearing. Mr. Porter, he said, extending his hand, I wanted to thank you. I've been trying to get justice for what happened to me for 5 years. You made it happen in a month. You helped make it happen, I said. Your testimony, your willingness to come forward, that made the pattern clear. Still, he smiled, it feels good, doesn't it, watching them go down? It did feel good, not in a vindictive way, but in the way that justice always feels when it's properly served. Kevin was standing apart, watching the courthouse entrance. I thought I'd feel differently, he said when Marcus left. Happier, maybe, or at least satisfied, but mostly I just feel tired. That's normal, I said. You've been living with this stress for months. Now it's done. Is it, though? They still have to serve the sentences. What if they appeal? They won't. The plea deal waives their right to appeal. It's finished, Kevin. They're going to prison, they're paying restitution, and they're never going to hurt anyone else. He nodded slowly. Then I guess it really is over. The final piece of business came several weeks later in the form of a certified check. Edward had pursued the counterclaim for legal fees, and the court had ordered Vanessa to pay. Since she'd already pleaded guilty to fraud, there was no question about liability. The $18,400 Kevin was awarded represented every penny we'd spent on Edward's fees, Gerald's investigation, and Thomas's financial analysis. The check arrived at my house. Kevin came over to see it. Blood from a stone, I said, holding the cashier's check. The court seized what little Vanessa had in her accounts before she went to prison. This is probably the only money any of us will ever see. I don't care about the money, Kevin said. I just want to move on. And he had been moving on. In the weeks since the plea hearing, he'd reconnected with the friends Vanessa had isolated him from. Started dating someone new, a teacher he'd met through a mutual friend who thought $2 million for a wedding was insane and suggested they go hiking instead. He looked healthier, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said, settling into one of my study chairs. "That lunch at the French room, when you said, 'Prove it.' You knew right then, didn't you? That she couldn't prove it, that it was all fake." I poured us both a drink. I suspected. The demand for such a specific amount, delivered with such confidence, that's not how real wedding planning works. Real couples discuss budgets, negotiate, compromise. They don't demand $2 million over lunch. And the note I passed you? Confirmed what I was already thinking. I sat down across from him. "But here's the thing, Kevin. You knew too. That's why you wrote the note. Some part of you recognized the manipulation, the lies. You just needed someone to validate that instinct." He was quiet for a moment. "I asked her once, early on, if she loved me or my money. What did she say? She cried. Said she couldn't believe I'd ask such a hurtful question. That she loved me for who I was, not what I had." He laughed bitterly. "I apologized to her for doubting her. That's what they do. They make you feel guilty for being smart." I took a sip of my drink. "But you learned something valuable. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is." "Did you ever doubt yourself during all this?" "Once," I admitted. "Right before we went to that empty office for the meeting. I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if this really is just a misunderstanding, and I'm destroying my son's relationship over paranoia?" "What changed your mind?" "Nothing changed my mind because I wasn't really doubting. That was just nerves. The evidence was solid. I knew we were right." I smiled. "And that empty office with the $15 folding chairs confirmed it beautifully." Kevin laughed, a real laugh. The first genuine one I'd heard from him in months. The look on her face when she realized you knew everything. I've never seen someone go so pale so fast. Professional scammers are used to controlling the narrative. When they lose that control, they panic. I pulled out the check again, held it up to the light. This represents more than money. It represents accountability. She has to pay for what she did, literally and figuratively. "Are you going to cash it?" "Tomorrow. And I'm taking you to lunch with part of it. Somewhere nice." I paused. "Not the French room, though. That place has bad memories now." "Agreed." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes when a crisis has passed and peace has been restored. "Dad," Kevin said eventually, "thank you for believing me, for helping me, for everything." "That's what fathers do," I said simply. "We protect our kids, even when they're 35 years old and should probably know better." He smiled. I'll try to make better choices about who I date from now on." "See that you do. My investigating budget is exhausted." After Kevin left, I sat alone in my study, the check on the desk in front of me. $18,400. A small fortune to some, pocket change to others. To me, it was proof that the system could work when someone knew how to work it. I thought about Vanessa and Patricia, sitting in federal prison, facing more than a decade behind bars. I didn't feel sorry for them. They'd hurt 7 people, probably more we never found, and they'd done it without remorse. The recordings had made that clear. Kevin was the dumb boy. The victims were marks. The frauds were just business. Well, business had consequences. I turned to my hobby table, where an 1887 legal treatise on criminal procedure lay waiting for restoration. The leather binding was cracked, the pages yellowed with age, but the text was still sharp. Laws about evidence, procedure, the rights of the accused, and the duties of the prosecutor. Some things never change. Justice is still justice, whether it's 1887 or now. The tools evolve, email instead of telegrams, recorded conversations instead of witness affidavits, but the principle remains the same. Do the crime, face the consequences. I picked up my restoration tools and got to work. The book would take months to properly restore, but I had time now. The crisis was over, my son was safe, and justice had been served. When someone demands $2 million over Sunday lunch, they should remember this. There might be someone at the table who spent nearly 4 decades learning to recognize a con when he sees one. Someone who knows that when a person truly loves you, they ask what you think, not what you'll pay. Vanessa Morales learned that lesson the hard way, and she'd have 12 years to think about it. As for me, I had an antique book to restore and a life to get back to. The quiet life I'd retired into, the one I'd earned after 38 years of putting criminals away. Turned out, you can retire from prosecution, but the prosecutor never really retires from you. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.
덕비 천안 사러. 청주였나? 맞아. 덕비는 그리고 여자친구 있어. 남친 구합니다. 아이고 무거워. 산을 왜 이렇게 많이 다니는 거야. 그리고 하고 힘들어. 크로운 찾기가 뭐야? 멤버 구하기 하라고.